branching off of that really quickly, it's amazing how certain multi-millionaires or billionaires that I've sent the message to, and they respond in like 20, 30 minutes. I'm just like, how in the heck?
Let me tell you, the richest people respond the fastest.
Yes.
The richest people respond the fastest. The most wealthiest people, the smartest people I know respond the fastest.
I wouldn't even say his name because I don't even have, I would want to ask permission before I said it. But I text this billionaire with permission from the person who connected us. So I text him, and when I tell you in less than 30 minutes, like, not only responded, provided the resources, told me who to contact, told me to reach back out if I needed XYZ. I'm just like, I had to look at my phone and was like, did he respond that fast?
Yeah.
Still like,
it's actually, I think, a learned behavior that it makes your life easier to just respond to something quickly, right? And take care of something and just knock it out and don't forget about it.
I have a bad habit of like reading and then hitting like unread. Like, I'm gonna go back and
you can go back to it. I'm trying to be better at that too. Like, just respond when you receive it, because I have so many emails right now, and even from people. If you're in my inbox on LinkedIn, on Instagram, and email, just know it's not personal. I promise you, I have good intentions. I'm actually probably thinking about you right now. And I am going to respond. Don't hold it to my heart. Hold it to my mind. But I am trying to get this rich mentality of being a fast responder.
Same. I think I am below 1,000 emails right now, which I'm proud of myself. But and for the last 3 years, I've been like, December 31st, project inbox 0. And I have failed every single year to get the 0. So I need to get the 0, and I need to adapt to this mentality of just respond fast, get out of the way.
Yeah.
But I said to say, also the CEO, the last two CEOs of Y Combinator, the second one being Gary Tan. Gary was my very first investor.
Yeah.
CapWay. So Gary used to be at Initialized Capital. The two GPs there used to be Gary Tan and then Alex Dohanian, who some people know is Serena Williams' husband. So Gary it was crazy because when I was pitching, going out and pitching for the first time, because I didn't pitch for Sheena Allen House, but I pitched for my second company. It wasn't even that I got a lot of no's, which I got a lot of no's, but it was mainly because they were just so uneducated on what I was building.
Yeah, that's the hardest part. You can never get over that part.
And so I'm going down, I'm like, I'm building a digital bank for people who are unbanked to underbanked. And it's like, people in America don't have bank accounts. And I was like, yeah, people in America, or people have bank accounts, but they're still underbanked. So they need XYZ. So trying to educate an investor, because investors are going to invest in what they know. People talk about pattern matching, but it's not always just from a gender perspective or a race perspective. It's also a knowledge perspective.
Yeah.
They invest in what they know.
And an economic perspective.
Yes. And so the minute I would get into a pitch meeting, and I got to the point where they was asking questions, not from a business perspective, but more of an educational perspective, I knew then I was like, this is a no. We can go ahead and just stop this meeting now, because you are not about to write me a check for something that you have no clue what the heck is going on.
Have you ever been like in a pitch and you just know, you're like, I'm wasting my time. Just go ahead.
This is not it.
Those be the worst ones.
But I knew Gary got it because I pitched to Gary. Jen Wolf, who I don't think she's there anymore, but Jen Wolf made the intro to Gary. I went to San Francisco pre-COVID. This is when you actually still
had to go in person.
Yes, had to go in person. So I remember going to San Francisco, meeting with Gary. He walks in the room, and of course, like, I put my pitch deck up. And I don't even think we made it past the second slide. And it went from more of like me pitching to a conversation. Gary is an immigrant. He had come from, his background was understanding what it was like. He knew what predatory lending was. He knew what it was like to be unbanked, underbanked. He understood what it was like to be someone who had parents who were immigrants. And so the minute we started having a conversation, I knew, I was like, okay, he gets it. And and mind you, I'm not saying he's the only person in Silicon Valley who got it, but he was the first person that I had come upon.
Yeah, that was like, oh, I understood the problem, like, personally.
Yes, I get it. And I remember I left their space in San Francisco. I went to Cheesecake Factory in Union Square. And by the time I got up the elevator to like walk out of the elevator into Cheesecake Factory, Jen was calling my phone. She's like, we're in. And it was like, I don't know, there was like 20, 30 minutes. And it was like, I'm in. But Gary is now he's CEO of Y Combinator. So I even like the direction. You had I would say a viral IG story, but you talked about your IG story, the differences of what you see Gary bringing into Y Combinator as far as like what they're asking for.
Oh, yes, how to expand it, right?
How it's expanding.
And so it just kind of tells you that eventually it may take people a long time to get there. Yeah. Right. But eventually tech moves into direction. Sometimes you see it too early. Yeah. Right. Or maybe you see it at the right time. But there is a thing of being too early to a space where people just don't quite get it yet. And then you look up, in my instance, it was like GovTech, right? And I couldn't sell GovTech to anyone. Like nobody wanted to invest in GovTech because they felt like the sales cycles were too slow. They felt like it was just too much bureaucracy around the politics, and no one wanted to talk about it. And so when I first had, Resilia, there was a component of that we wanted to sell into government, and I completely just ditched that idea. But now, fast forward to today, right? On the YC of what companies are looking for, GovTech was at the very top. Now you have Elon Musk, who is like over there trying to create government efficiency. Basically, is running the government from his X account, Twitter account, whatever you want to still call it. And I'm like, but I've been telling y'all about government efficiency for like the past 10 years. Yeah. But thank y'all for all of us now getting to the table. But really, thank you, tech, for now coming to the table and realizing that the problems in America are too big to ignore, and they're too big for tech to ignore. And welcome. We are here now.
But it's interesting because my second company, CapWay, Fintech. So, for those who don't know, that company was birthed out of the fact that I'm from Mississippi. Mississippi, unfortunately, has the highest population of unbanked and underbanked residents. So the problem that I was solving, I also do personally. Mm-hmm. My grandmother didn't have a bank account. My great-grandmother didn't have a bank account. I definitely had the family where the money was in the mattress and the wall and all of that. So that was something that I personally grew up knowing. And it's funny because I feel like we all see it, but we don't compute it. Think about all the movies we see where the granddad has the money saved in the house. Yeah. Color Purple. Where did Mr. keep his money?
Well, shoot, my grandmother too. She would cash her Social Security check and she would just keep it in her purse. Yeah. You know what I mean? She just have hundreds of dollars.
So I think people have probably heard the stories but never computed how big it is. Mm-hmm. Aretha Franklin didn't want to be she would tell you pay her in cash. Mm-hmm. And if you look at her, especially when she first started, she would always have her purse with her when she performed on stage, or it would be near her because that's because she got paid in cash. She wanted her money in cash and she would put it in her purse. Talk about even the movies, Color Purple. Mr. had his money in the coop. When he needed that money for to get Silly Sisters back to America, it was in the coop. Soul Food. Yeah. Where the granddad? Remember the granddad money was in the TV. So I said to say, CapWay was really born out of the fact that there was also personal to my community, where I grew up. And talking about tech coming to the table, it was where are we going to finally allow digital inclusion and technology, the technical inclusion, to include people in these industries or these spaces that they've been excluded out of. And people have been excluded out of the financial system in a lot of different ways. And so that was where CapWay came to be. The original idea, of course, is, digital bank for the unbanked, the underbanked. Over time, clearly when you're trying to find product market fit or when you're scaling, you bring in new services or you pivot. Eventually, the company more so was looking to pivot towards not just financial education and debit cards, but also infrastructure. Yeah. We realized that there was a huge problem with the infrastructure. But the other problem is you're in a regulated industry. Mm-hmm. And we say as founders, and we're told as founders, move fast. move fast, fail fast, move fast. Like, but you got to go.
Right.
And in a regulated industry, you got to answer to somebody else a lot of times before you can like move fast. So, an example, when we did our debit cards, which first time, so I didn't know this.
Right.
Even your card art has to be approved by whoever your card is with. So our card was with the Visa. Visa had to approve the way the card looked before we could ever even get past that checkpoint on the millions of things on the checklist anyway. So Visa might take 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months. It's like you have no control over how long it's going to take Visa to say, okay, we approve your card art. Mind you, our card art was black. All black.
Right.
But our name was on it. The language that's on the back of it had to be a certain way. And so you want to be done in 2 weeks, but it might be 2 months. So my fundraising journey was probably a little bit different from yours because you kind of bridged off of an industry you were already in. Mine was a little bit different. I went into an entire different industry, but was lucky that pre-seed round, we raised $800K with initialized capital leading that. And then we went on to raise our seed and then a seed extension. So essentially we raised millions of dollars. But probably a mistake that I've made, I'm sure a lot of us have made, particularly as Black women, it's not raising enough.
Yes. Or raising too much.
Yeah. Not knowing what to do.
Which is rare though, right? Yeah.
It's quite rare. But I mean, I will say I had a mentor tell me, when you raise money, the only thing you can do is spend it.
Yeah.
So you got to know what you're spending it on. So use of funds, being prepared, knowing if you budgeted for something or projected something, it's probably me 2x that though. But I'll say my mistake, like I own it as CEO, was not raising enough.
Yeah. And so kind of bring us to present day. So you feel like you didn't raise enough at CapWay. Y'all still went on to do like really amazing things. You had a big announcement this year. So where are you now in your CapWay journey or just like your journey in general?
So CapWay is no longer active. So the company was shut down, and it wasn't due to traction, by the way. A lot of people think that we shut down because of traction. We shut down for 2 main reasons, and they both came back to money. Startups survive off of oxygen, and oxygen is money. Yeah, we ran out of money. The 2 reasons we ran out of money, one was fundraising just wasn't happening. I haven't really talked about it publicly, but probably one of our hardest things of trying to fundraise was there was another Black-owned Fintech, Greenwood, which most people I'm sure have heard of, and we would pitch. They would say, "Oh, we've already invested in Greenwood," or "We're talking to Greenwood," or "Greenwood's raised $60 million. You know, you've only raised $5 million. Right? Even if you raise another $5 or $10 million, you kind of far behind in this fundraising race." And so it just became almost, I won't say impossible, but it was extremely tough to raise money. And a lot of it came down to the fact that for some odd reason, investors felt like it could be 2 people in the space. Yeah. Also the fact that we weren't the same company. Right. Outside of the fact that the founders were Black and we had a debit card and we were in the fintech space, our target audience wasn't the same. Our execution wasn't the same. Even our roadmap, from what I understood, was not the same. You know, we had a very much focus on starting an unbanked to underbanked, scaling out to even like the working poor, scaling out to more people who were not below the poverty line, but more so middle to lower class, but still living paycheck to paycheck, even if they were middle class. And then, of course, we essentially had a global plan. It was very different from what they were doing. But for some reason, investors only saw this. It was like Black founders, fintech, and we can't fund more than one. So that was the issue. And the second issue was we had, most people don't know this, but any digital bank that you see, I don't care how big or small, I'm talking PayPal, Chime, it doesn't matter. Every digital bank has to have what's called a partner bank or a sponsor bank. It is required, regulations requires it. We end up bumping heads with our sponsor bank, and they had way more money than we did to fight a legal battle. Yeah. And so to go back to your investors and say, I need X amount of dollars to move to a different sponsor bank to get out of this, in the midst of other investors saying like, oh, well, this fintech already has raised $50 million. Raising it got to be what we felt like was impossible. Right. And so essentially we shut down because we ran out of money for those reasons. So CapWay is no longer, but I still do work in the financial inclusion space in different ways. And I think I'll forever do work in the financial inclusion space because it's also a personal passion of mine. I also think there's a lot of opportunity still in the space, by the way. I think that we're nowhere close to disrupting it. The closest I think we've gotten is overdraft fees now being like either feds or actually maybe like last week are trying to cap.
Right, how many overdraft fees?
The overdraft fees to like $5 an hour and only a certain amount.
And shoot, that's another reason why people are unbanked, because they can never get out of the debt of overdraft fees, and then the bank essentially outs them. Yeah, right.
It's expensive to be poor.
It is, and it shuts down their account, and now they can't ever open up an account at that bank. Right.
Ever talk about rich lessons. It's expensive to be poor.
It's expensive to be poor.
So you talk about your aunt. Like it's much cheaper for me to go cash my Social Security check, keep my cash, and when I'm out of money, I'm out of money. Whereas if I had that bank and I run out of money, now I got to pay an overdraft fee because now I done went over. So when I get my check again, man, somebody's check only $400. Right. And they got 2 overdraft fees. They just took out $50 of my $400
or $125
exactly.
whatever.
So I say this, I think there's still so much opportunity. I think that fintechs have a chance to, even the biggest of the biggest, the JP Morgan, the Wells Fargo's, I think as fintechs become more of a thing, because we're still really early, in my opinion, in this space. I think as regulators catch up to what's going on, I think we start to challenge and make overdraft fees change in other ways and other things. So I think the opportunities of the financial inclusion space is still huge. So I'll continue to do work there. But that's not to say that's what I'm doing next.
Yeah. And, you know, I've also moved on from Resilia. It's still, you know, going today. But in 2023, I stepped down as CEO. Obviously, once founder, always a founder. And now I'm working on something new. But that's why I said sometimes you raise too much money, right? But no one ever tells you, right, or no one ever told me to, maybe you should exit now, or maybe you should look for opportunities or partners to have a strategic exit where you can place a company inside of another company and continue to grow it without raising what ultimately became $50 million, right? So we raise...
and people put that crown on your head, it's like, you raised $50 million and you're behind the scenes, you're just like,
oh Lord. But we raised the money because that was the expectation of us by our investors, was to continuously raise capital, continuously drive up the valuation of the company. And so no one ever told me, Sevetri, like, you guys are making like millions of dollars in ARR and the market is really good. It's 2022. The market is really good. Maybe y'all should exit. Yeah. Right? Like maybe you should exit instead of continuously getting on that hamster wheel. And so I think that had I done it again, I would have exited the company at Series A and never went on to raise a Series B. And that's just being honest, right? The dynamics of the board shifted, the expectations around like who was doing what everything shifted in the company. And I think for me, it was like this realization overall of, man, if I had only done this. And I think a lot of people have this thought process when they're building companies, they're building businesses. And hopefully I can take like those lessons into the next thing that I'll be launching and talking about in the future.
So we talk about the mental health though of entrepreneurs. So before you jump to talking about, you know, a little talk about what you're doing next, what was your mental like making a decision to step down? It's something that you built from scratch.
Yeah, I think that for me, 2 things. One, I always knew that I was going to eventually leave as CEO. I think that we were reaching like a ceiling, and also I wasn't passionate about what we were building the way I was when I first started building it either. So I knew eventually that I was going to kind of begin to make my segue out at some point and probably go build something new. That ended up happening a lot faster. But I do feel that my mentality at that time, and one of the reasons why I knew the decision was ultimately going to be made at some point is because one, I no longer love doing what I was doing. I told you about, like, I used to wake up in like cold sweats at night. I couldn't sleep. I just had so much anxiety. And I love my customers and my clients. But also I feel like Black founders, we are the therapists of our teams in a way that white men are not. Women founders too, we become the therapist, and we are expected to move with a type of grace that actually hinders business, if that makes sense. And so I would have team members come to me, and it was like therapy hour. And I'm old school too. Like, I'm like your dad. I still carry cash in my pocket. I'm not on the bank, but I definitely still carry cash because I'm very old school. Because I'm like, yes, I have so much empathy for humans and what they're going through. And I'm the type of person that say, hey, like I told my team today, it's been great. I'm gonna see y'all January 6th. Y'all have a good time. Make sure you rest up. In January 6th, we're gonna get going though. You know what I mean? And so I'm really big about mental health and ensuring people have time to rest. But when it's time to go, it's time to go. And so I had to kind of also grapple with, and also now as I'm like rebuilding a new team for something new, about what is the balance between being empathetic to a team and also ensure that you do the things that need to be done, and that maybe your sofa, or Zoom conversation should not be a therapy hour as CEO with people.
Of the good, bad, and ugly of Resilient, what would you say was your biggest lesson?
I would say my biggest lesson, outside of the fact that we didn't need to raise more capital, we should have created a exit strategy when we had cash in the bank, and that, we were, continuously growing. Like that was no issue, but that's when you sell, right? Like, no one told me, like, oh, that's when you should sell, when you're growing, when you got cash in the bank, that's the perfect time to sell. So that was probably my biggest lesson overall. Is to kind of understand like the movements, and that success doesn't necessarily mean you have to continuously build, that you need more, right? And I think I told you that the other day. I was like, it doesn't necessarily equate to better. Like, more does not equate to better. Having more does not equate to more.
Yeah.
That's my rich lesson.
I mean, CapWay definitely taught me a lot that I'll take into my next, into whatever I do next. But I'll probably say for me, my biggest lesson, I continue to put my own money into the company, mainly because I was so optimistic about eventually we're going to raise, like eventually it's going to come through. And I put a lot of my own money to keep the company going, when essentially I should have just said, it is what it is. Like the journey has come to an end. And it took me, I would say not quite a year, but I funded that company for quite a few months before it took actually an investor. So one of our investors, women are like therapists. So this investor actually used to be a founder herself, and she gave me a call. This was like on a Saturday, and she's like, what's going on? Because she at this point had known that the company, we were running out of money, because of course you try to update your investors, and we actually had started having M&A conversations anyway, and it was like on a Saturday, and she was like, when do you have your team calls again? And I was like, every Monday at 9. She's like, on Monday you need to let every team member go. She's like, if the team member's not contributing to what needs to happen in order to get this acquisition done, you need to let everybody go, because you're just giving away money. You're just burning money, because either you're going to sell this company or it's not going to work out. But there's no point in continuing to burn money at all. And she's like, I know what I just said. I know this is probably the hardest thing you've ever done. Not just as the CEO, as a person. She was like, but on Monday, You need to let everybody go. And on the call Monday, I got on the call and it's like, guys, like, this is what it is. And I honestly, I didn't know how they would respond, to be quite honest. And probably because I was so nervous about just even having to like do it. And mind you, that investor, she actually did call afterwards to even check on me, like my mental. But I will say, like, now that I've done it, I had a lot of backlash from a lot of employees. And number one, I'm not saying that they were wrong, because that's the job that we have as CEOs that nobody really talks about. Our decisions literally account for if somebody can pay their rent next month or not. Like, that's a heavy weight that you carry. So I'm not mad that, you know, they were upset or they felt the way. But I think that some of it went a little too far, in my opinion. I definitely want to get into that for various reasons. But that was probably one of the biggest lessons of, you got to know when to let go. Because holding on, I thought at the time holding on and still paying it out of my pocket and keeping the company going, I was doing myself a favor, but I was also doing my team a favor. Yeah. Only for in the end for it kind of to backfire. Yeah. So that was by far for me my biggest lesson.
You know, a lot of CEOs say that they think about, I remember this guy, he was saying that every day he wants to come into his office and turn off the lights, but then he thinks about how many, you know, because the company exists, how many people are able to pay their bills and keep their lights on. And so I think that is something they have to grapple with. And I don't think that employees know, particularly when companies are like in a startup phase and small businesses, how much the founders are doing behind the scenes to literally ensure they can put food on the table. Like, people are foregoing paying their mortgages. People are pulling equity out of their homes. I've done it. People are, you know, taking all the money out of their accounts to pay payroll, to make payroll. Yes. And people have this big Microsoft mentality, right? And Google mentality. It was like, yeah, that job would replace you tomorrow. You know what I mean? You work in a startup with 8 people. Like, what are you talking about?
Not the same.
We just want you to do your job. So everybody wins, you know?
Well, that was, so yeah. That's my, and I'll take that. Even now already I've learned from it, but I'll definitely take that into, you know, whatever I do next, and I won't make that mistake again. I'll say that.
Yes. Well, I think this kind of wraps it up. Do you feel like that was your rich lesson before we end it?
Yeah, I think as far as this episode, where I am in the journey now, for sure, because that which is another episode, but that led me, I won't know if I'll say it led me into a depression, but it definitely put me in a space that I had never been in. Clearly the company was in Atlanta. I left Atlanta. I went back to Mississippi because I needed to be back around family. I needed to be back in the country. Like, I needed to be able to go out and see the rabbits and the deer, and because it just, from a mental perspective, it does something to you. But I gained, I got like almost 170 pounds. My adult weight is like 130, 135. I looked up and I was 170 pounds. Yeah. And I literally didn't even realize I had gotten to this space until my dad, my parents were divorced. I went back to Mississippi. I was staying at my mom's place. When I talk to my dad, as you know this, we FaceTime. We don't like call, like we FaceTime. And every day when he would FaceTime me, he would notice I was in the exact same space on the couch. And then he would come over and I would be in the exact same spot on the couch. And one day he was like, "You're not going to the gym. You're in the same space. You're not doing anything. Like, you're not even on the computer every day." Yeah. And I'm a computer person. He's like, "What is wrong with you?" And he wasn't saying it even in a mean way. It was like a concerning way. It was like, "What is wrong with you?" And I'll never forget, Thanksgiving of 2023, we had Thanksgiving, and I don't know what it was. It was like, I looked in the mirror, I got on the scale like 2 days after Thanksgiving, and I was like almost right at 170. And it was just something that clicked, like that switch right then. I was like, I can't do this. Like, Sheena, you got to get yourself together. Yeah. And that was when, you know, I started fasting. Definitely started trying to rebuild a spiritual relationship with God. I started grounding, started earthing more. But definitely my rich lesson, my biggest lesson, because it was expensive in my pocket, because I spent so much money out of my personal pocket to keep the company going. It was a lesson in health.
Yeah.
Because I was to the point I was like pre-diabetic. I had gained all this weight. It was a rich lesson in a lot of different ways, for sure.
Yeah, that's a whole nother episode, but we definitely gonna talk about that because like the idea of being depressed around whether being in companies, whatever that may look like. But we did it. We completed our first episode. Just the beginning though, so many more to come.
For sure.